It's 2016, and it's a great year for video games. It might have been shit for everything else, but hey, we could always close our blinds to the rest of the world and play all the great games that were coming out. The next generation finally went into full swing, and developers were releasing some of their best games yet. Doom, Overwatch, Hitman, Titanfall 2, The Witness, Uncharted 4, XCOM 2, Superhot, Stardew Valley, and hell, even some long-awaited games finally came out. Everyone was having a pretty good year, except for Nintendo, where 2016 will go down as their worst year ever. This was the year where nearly all their games were disappointments. Although Nintendo did release some decent 3DS titles, most of Nintendo's output for the handheld was either some lackluster Wii U port or games that are still shunned by Nintendo fans today. Nintendo had already given up on the Wii U by this point, and the only major title they released this year would go on to represent everything that was wrong with the console. In an interesting turn of events, Nintendo started to make mobile games, but they didn't set the world on fire. But there was one mobile game that went on to dominate the globe in 2016. Pokemon Go. The Pokemon franchise was celebrating its 25th anniversary, and Pokemania was in full swing once again thanks to this app. Millions would go to church for the first time in years just to take a look at the face of God. Despite the game not being made by Nintendo, they still profited heavily from it, with Pokemon Sun and Moon having the highest sales of the franchise in years. Speaking of nostalgia trips, Nintendo wanted to cash in on one and decided to release their first plug-and-play console, the NES Classic Edition. With a collection of 30 classic NES games, the novelty would sell out everywhere, starting a new trend of classic mini-consoles that would last for a few years. Despite their floundering video game business, Nintendo started making a profit again thanks to these two successes. But Nintendo's future in gaming was still in question, as all anyone could talk about was their next console, codenamed NX. As many of you know, the Wii U was nothing short of a disaster, and Nintendo was scrambling to salvage their failing gaming business. Despite releasing some of their best games in years, the Wii U's bad reputation, as well as the more powerful consoles, overshadowed everything else, and it would become Nintendo's worst-selling console not named Virtual Boy. Nintendo needed to replace the Wii U as quickly as possible, so they immediately got to work on a successor. In order to make their next console a success, Nintendo needed all the help they could get. The first decision they made was to get all their developers to make games on the new system. In 2013, Nintendo announced they're merging their console and handheld gaming divisions together in one team. They said it was because they wanted the two teams to work closer together, but there was more to it. Throughout this time, we were seeing many games getting ported from the Wii U to the 3DS. It honestly made owning a Wii U pointless since you could get most of its games on the cheaper 3DS. Sure, the Wii U was more powerful, but the games still played mostly the same, so you might as well get your Nintendo fix on the cheap. And I think Nintendo understood this, considering the reception the Wii U was getting at the time. The Wii U's gamepad was not well received in the way Nintendo advertised it, mainly as a second screen companion for most games, but the gamepad did get a great reception for its other function, off-TV play. Players could play through most of the Wii U's library using just the gamepad, effectively making the system a handheld. The range of the gamepad wasn't very far, but it was a good compromise for having a console-quality experience in the palm of your hands. Which got Nintendo thinking, what if we provided a console-quality experience on an actual handheld system? It's funny to think about it now. I remember so many people were calling for Nintendo to ditch the gamepad and to release a Wii U bundle without its inclusion. Knowing Nintendo at the time, I knew they wouldn't do such a thing because they had too much pride in their own ideas. Though that's not always a good thing. In fact, I thought Nintendo would go in the opposite direction. I believed Nintendo would release a Wii U console that had its internals entirely in the gamepad, which could then be used to connect to a TV. Even though that didn't happen, it kinda did, so I was right from a certain point of view. But then again, why wouldn't they make such a device? Nintendo struggled badly in the console space, but they were still dominant in the handheld space. Even though mobile gaming was taking over the world, Nintendo still believed that there was interest in bringing a console-like experience on the go. But wait, you're saying to yourself, weren't there other handhelds that had a console-quality experience and did work out? Oh, I have special plans for this thing. But even though they claimed to be a console-like experience, it was still limiting in many ways. The system lacked critical buttons that would make home console ports easy, and you couldn't hook it up to a TV. Nintendo would address these issues with their new console. They wanted to create a hybrid system that would work as a handheld system, but could also connect to a TV and play like a console. Because of the combined experience, they concluded their next console will be the only platform they support from now on, as both their console and handheld teams will be making games for it. They may take a hit on some hardware sales, but if one of them was already selling badly, would it really hurt much? Nintendo had their idea and the support of all their developers. They just need the hardware to make it work. If this handheld was going to act as their console, it needed to have some pretty beefy hardware. Their console developers would want the hardware to be at least on par with the Wii U, but there weren't many options for mobile hardware that fits that criteria. They could always work with their current partners to make a custom chipset, but that would take years to produce, and the Wii U was already burning to the ground, so they shopped around for a new partner. Fortunately, Nintendo was in luck, as they encountered a chip company in California that had a dumpster full of mobile chips in front of their building.
Perfect.
Enter NVIDIA. Although they're mostly known for their high-end PC graphics cards, NVIDIA tried to break into the mobile market with their Tegra chips. The problem was their chips worked better as a furnace than as a phone, so NVIDIA got their asses kicked by every other chip maker in the mobile space. They tried to use their chips in more niche products, but the Tegra line never took off. They had millions of chips lying around that they couldn't sell, and they were ready to cut their losses and leave the mobile business. And then came Nintendo. Nintendo saw all these chips and thought they could use them for their own hardware. Thus, they made a deal with NVIDIA to use the modified Tegra X1 chip as their APU for their next platform. People were already impressed with this chip when it was used in the NVIDIA Shield TV, where some games could run at 4K, and many were hoping to see the same results on Nintendo's new console. It was certainly more powerful than the Wii U, and with a modern architecture, it would make porting games from the other consoles much easier, even if sacrifices need to be made. Unfortunately, the 4K support was dropped, but regardless, the Tegra X1 was the most powerful mobile chip at the time, and it was more than enough for what Nintendo needed. So Nintendo has their concept and their hardware, so they should be set to go, right? Well, not so fast! What about that Nintendo innovation, you're probably not asking yourself? Wouldn't Nintendo want to push another gimmick like they've done with their last two consoles? Well, yes, since the whole hybrid approach wasn't enough. Nintendo decided to add that Nintendo difference, but they did it in a more nuanced manner. Introducing the Joy-Con. Because of the hybrid approach, Nintendo needed to create a controller that would work in both modes. They designed a split controller that would attach to the size of the tablet, but could also be used as a regular controller when connected to a dock. Nintendo went a step further and designed each piece of the controller so it could work on its own. Instead of a D-pad, they used 4 separate buttons so it could match the 4 face buttons on the other controller. The back edge of each controller also has 2 bumper buttons, which could be made easier to press with a dongle, and when you turn the controllers to the side, you effectively have 2 Super Nintendo controllers with an analog stick. Oh wow, you're not saying to yourself, 2 separate controllers! Is that the best they could do? Well, no actually, as they decided to add everything they could think of into these things. They added a gyroscope to each Joy-Con, meaning these things could be used like a Wiimote. They added haptic feedback, which they labeled as HD Rumble that can simulate moving objects in games. They even added an IR sensor to the right Joy-Con. Because why the fuck not? And best of all, these controllers are flimsy as shit, so people would be forced to buy these things multiple times. It's a win-win! So Nintendo had their idea, their hardware, and their new controller. And now they were finally ready to show what they had to the world. In October 2016, Nintendo officially revealed the NX, where it was given the name Nintendo Switch. There's certainly no mistaking this console as a Wii accessory, as their first ad was a complete rebranding of the company as a whole. Gone were the ads involving kids begging their parents to buy a Wii U, and here were the ads involving your average millennial living their lives in fancy houses and going to rooftop parties, all while playing their fancy $300 game consoles. Man, millennials are so spoiled. Anyway, Nintendo showed the Switch to its full extent in the ad, showing how you can play on the TV as well as on the go. They even gave some game previews, like a new Mario game, more Splatoon, a basketball game, and Skyrim? Man, Todd Howard would port that game on anything. And, oh yeah, there are also some Wii U ports. But who cares? We got third-party support now! Many were impressed with what they saw in the trailer. They were interested in the concept, and they were hopeful that Nintendo finally learned their lesson this time. Nintendo even kept the hype train going by announcing a press conference in January. It looked like Nintendo learned at least one lesson from the Wii U days. Then the press conference happened, and Nintendo showed off all the games they had in store for the Switch. as well as their big launch game, 1-2 Switch. It wouldn't be a Nintendo console launch without a tech demo, and 1-2 Switch fit that bill nicely. It was a terrible game though. It was mostly a collection of mini-games that showed off the features of the Joy-Cons, like with the IR sensor and the HD rumble. It might be neat for the first few minutes, but after that, there isn't anything else to it. Worst of all, this was a full retail release, and not bundled with the console, so why would anyone spend $50 for this? Everyone thought Nintendo was nuts for pushing this title. There's barely anything to it! It's even more problematic as there were only 5 retail titles available at launch for the Switch, which included your standard Just Dance and Skylanders games, and a new Bomberman for whatever reason. The only other title was a Wii U port, but who cares about Wii U games? Especially since it's only The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. This was the most hyped game for years, as it's Nintendo's first original HD Zelda game and their first attempt at a modern open world game. It was initially made with the Wii U in mind, as they planned to use the gamepad heavily, but Nintendo needed a killer app to push their new hardware, as if there weren't plenty already, so they decided to scrap the gamepad features and make Breath of the Wild a cross-gen game. It seemed like Nintendo made a wise choice. They say it only takes one game to sell a console, and Breath of the Wild certainly was it. Who cares if it's on the Wii U? Who even owned one of those things? Here's an open world Zelda game where you can do whatever you want, whenever you want, and go wherever your heart desires. And it's all running on a handheld! Breath of the Wild got rave reviews from critics, and is considered one of the greatest games ever made. And this time, I do understand why. To be honest, I'm not the biggest Zelda fan, as you can probably tell in my previous videos, and I'm not the biggest fan of open world games either. But Breath of the Wild did something that no other game at the time did. Complete and total freedom. Everywhere you looked was accessible, and the entire game was open-ended, with no waypoints outside the endgame. Wherever you went, there was something to do or something to check out, and my ADHD brain was satisfied every time the monitors started ringing when I came across a new shrine. The combat is quick and precise, and although the enemy variety is pretty slim, there are a ton of different ways you can go about defeating them. Many people complained about the weapon durability mechanic, but I didn't really mind it. It forced you to try out many different weapons, and even though some of them might be weak, it was fun blowing off enemies using the leaf. Plus, there are many different NPCs to talk to with their own stories, and it made everyone sim for this fish!
A red snapper! It's very tasty.
Breath of the Wild was a game that not only pushed the Zelda series in a new direction, but also helped push open world gaming forward. Many would climb every mountain, ford every stream, follow every rainbow, and make Nintendo's dream come true as they had a system seller on their hands. Despite the paltry launch lineup, the Switch sold out everywhere with each user buying their own copy of Breath of the Wild. But it takes more than one game to keep a system alive, and Nintendo knew it. They sacrificed the Wii U in order to get all their top tier developers to make games for the Switch, and their plan was to get a new Nintendo game out for the Switch every month. They followed up the success of Breath of the Wild with Mario Kart 8? Another Wii U port? This game couldn't even save the Wii U! What makes Nintendo think it'll sell? So, it looks like Mario Kart is still a system seller after all. Mario Kart 8 was a great game, and it's still a great game on the Switch, and they managed to improve it. There's some neat quality of life features like not having to hold the A button for the gas anymore, as well as turn assist for tilt controls, but it also brought back the double items from Double Dash, which is always good so you have a better chance of getting screwed over by a blue shell. It also added all the DLC tracks, brought in some new characters, and they fixed the battle mode to not be complete shit. But Nintendo kept the release train going with a bunch of new titles like ARMS, Splatoon 2, and a bunch of other Wii U ports. Well, they're new to most people anyway. But the big game that showed just how serious Nintendo was about the Switch was Super Mario Odyssey. This was the sequel to Super Mario 64 that we've all been waiting for. Mario has never controlled this good in any game, and with the added power of Cappy, you can traverse pretty much anywhere. Not only that, but you can take control of nearly every enemy and NPC. You can be a frog, a Goomba, a piece of meat, or even a goddamn dinosaur.
Holy vacation, it's a dinosaur, Jesus Christ, what the fuck?
Plus, all the stages have their unique setting with incredible music and set pieces. Nintendo had another game-changing title on their hands, and it caused many to finally start taking them seriously again. Even third parties were starting to show interest. Initially, they only released their standard test games, but some got more ambitious, including some who have never supported a Nintendo console before. Bethesda surprised everyone by announcing another Skyrim port, but they went even further by bringing over some of their current-gen games as well, most notably Doom 2016. Now you can rock out to your favorite Christian music in front of the choir! But in all seriousness, it proved that current-gen ports were possible on the Switch. Doom 2016 was one of the best-looking games at the time, and nobody thought a game like this would be possible on a handheld, but they were wrong. Sure, the graphics might have been toned down and it's stuck at 30 frames per second, but it's the full Doom experience on a handheld, and it allows you to be a good Christian at church while you're stuck listening to a boring sermon. Doom, alongside Bethesda's other big shooter, Wolfenstein, were technically impressive ports, and to the surprise of everyone, these ports actually sold. As it turns out, many people were actually using the handheld aspect of the console. People were interested in buying games, including third-party games, for the Switch, as it allows them to play on both the TV and on the go. They might be watered down, but hey, sometimes people double dip just to play on the go. This caused many third parties to finally jump in. Ubisoft found success with an XCOM mashup between Mario and the Rabbids, and it's surprisingly decent. We saw Blizzard port their two biggest games, Epic bringing a bunch of free-to-play games, and 2K bringing all of their big franchises. Even EA came back by releasing the same FIFA game for the past 5 years, not to mention the plethora of indie titles that are released on a daily basis. Many games that we never thought we'd see on a Nintendo console were coming over, and the support continues to this day. This only caused more people to buy the Switch, and Nintendo managed to sell more Switch consoles in their first year than they sold Wii U's in its entire life. By 2021, the Switch would go on to become Nintendo's best-selling console, and if sales continue as they are, it might go on to be the best-selling console ever. And I can't think of a better console to find such success. Even though the GameCube is still my personal favorite for nostalgia's sake, I would consider the Switch to be Nintendo's objectively best console ever. It has some of the best third-party support for a Nintendo console since the 90s, and even Nintendo has released some of their best games ever on the system. Outside of Mario and Zelda, we also saw the return of 2D Metroid after a 2-decade hiatus, and it didn't disappoint. Fire Emblem had its own renaissance, alongside Kirby and Xenoblade. Pokemon might have stagnated in the main series, but we finally saw what an open-world Pokemon game could look like with Arceus. Nintendo did the impossible and actually made exercising fun. Hell, they even made playing with cardboard fun. Merging their two gaming divisions has been one of the best decisions Nintendo has ever made, as it gave them some of their best output in years, without any signs of slowing. Granted, the Switch isn't a perfect device. It was obvious from the beginning that the console was rushed out to market with its bare-bones OS and eShop, and they never bothered to update it. The Joy-Cons are way too small and flimsy, and the Pro Controller's D-pad is one of the worst I've ever seen, but there are decent alternatives to use instead. And yeah, spending money on a lackluster multiplayer service is bullshit, but in the end, Nintendo got most things right with the Switch. They learned nearly all of the mistakes from their previous consoles, and they're in the most successful phase because of it. So Nintendo's in a good place. They can't possibly mess up again, right? Oh, of course they can. They could always come up with a product with a name as dumb as the Wii U, or come up with some other silly idea that doesn't work. But if rumors are to be believed, it looks like Nintendo will use the same concept that has worked for them so far. But would that be enough? There's already a lot of competition out there. Of course, there's good old mobile gaming, which everyone thought would kill off traditional handheld gaming by this point. With the release of the iPhone, smartphones quickly took over the world, and many would start releasing games to capitalize on this new industry. Compared to traditional gaming formats, most games released on phones would generally cost a few dollars. But soon developers learned that people didn't even want to pay that much, so they focused entirely on free-to-play games, which was a bit of a gamble if you ask me.
Gambling.
Wait, who said that?
Hello, impressionable children and irresponsible adults! It's the Cash Clown coming at you with a new mobile game. Paid Lambo Legends. It's got an immersive online experience with everything you'd expect from a new gambling mechanism. RPG title starring cars, a car PG. It's got a live service storyline, substandard 3D graphics, event-only boss fights, pay-to-win battles, and hundreds of never-before-seen ways to self-inflict crippling death in the attempt to get an actual Lambo. Just enter the promo code,
Tom, make a gotcha video.
and you'll get 30 free loot boxes and a guaranteed pity roll that may not get you a Lambo, but perhaps a Jackson Pollock skin for your starter car. It's totally free!
Ugh, free. Many people wanted to play mobile games for free, so the developers decided to add sketchy monetization methods to compensate. Whether it's by forcing people to watch these weird ads or having ridiculous microtransactions, these get-rich-quick schemes always rub me the wrong way, and it causes me to not want to bother. Although billions of people still play them regardless, for more hardcore gamers, they might want something that doesn't try to swindle them every 5 minutes. Even if you ignore all the microtransactions, you still need to deal with touch controls. They may work fine for more casual titles, but if you're looking to play console-quality games on the go, you'll have to suffer through controls that don't recognize your button presses half the time. You can rectify this if you carry a controller with you, but if you're doing that, why not just carry a handheld instead? You'll save your phone's battery by using a separate device anyway. But what if your phone can provide a better experience than the Switch ever could? Then welcome to the world of cloud gaming. Instead of trying to get games to run on weaker hardware, why not have a supercomputer run it? Play all of your games on these massive servers and have them streamed directly to you. You can play your games on anything with a screen and internet access, wherever and however you want them. Why spend money on specific hardware when that crappy phone you bought a decade ago is good enough? Although cloud gaming has a bad reputation across the gaming community due to severe input lag, compressed video quality, and the fact that companies can take away access to your games at a whim, it has actually improved quite a bit over the years. In fact, it's gotten so good that I would even consider it a decent alternative to a console or PC. Trying out services like GeForce Now and xCloud has shown that playing games over the internet can actually provide a decent experience. The image quality might look a bit pixelated, but if you're playing them on a small screen, it won't be that noticeable. Surprisingly, the input lag has improved considerably, to the point where I don't really notice any. You still need a high-speed internet connection in order to get the best experience from these services, but I still got a decent experience even with a 5G connection. Data caps would be the main reason why game streaming would be unfeasible for most people, as at a rate of nearly 20 gigabytes per second on the highest settings, Comcast will ream you a new one in no time. But game streaming does provide some risk for Nintendo. How could you justify paying money for a heavily compromised version of a game running on mobile hardware where you can stream the full-fledged version of your game from anywhere? Hell, some Switch games already resort to using game streaming in order to run, but handhelds still provide one advantage. You can play your games literally anywhere. With cloud gaming, you always need to connect to the internet, and if you're at a place without internet, or if the local internet is slow, you're SOL when it comes to playing games. At least in America, there are still tons of areas where the internet isn't good enough for cloud gaming, so I'm not sure if cloud gaming will take off anytime soon. But it can be a problem for Nintendo once high-speed internet becomes widespread. For now, the best way to compete with Nintendo is to release your own handheld with buttons. There have been plenty of devices released that are mainly used for emulation, and there are even some Android handhelds coming with built-in controllers. But now we're seeing a ton of handhelds that are full-blown PCs. They can run Windows, so you can play all of your favorite PC games on the go. They might not be the best way to play these games, but many PC games are optimized enough to handle running on lower-end hardware, and they still end up running better than their Switch counterparts. However, fitting PC hardware into a handheld form factor isn't the easiest thing in the world, so there are some caveats. Most of these handhelds are ridiculously large and ridiculously heavy. You only get about 2 hours of battery at most running some intensive games, and using Windows with a touchscreen is not the most intuitive thing out there. Worst of all, these handhelds are ridiculously expensive and cost significantly more than the Switch. But there's one company that's actually putting in the effort to compete.
Hi, I'm Gabe Newell. I'm just wandering around your neighborhood.
Valve's Steam Deck is one of the best PC handhelds you can buy right now. At a starting price of $399, it's the only handheld out there that's actually competitive with the Switch. As someone with way too many games in their Steam library, the Steam Deck seems like the perfect device for me. And after playing around with it for the past month, I like it a lot. It's not exactly a powerful machine by PC standards, but with an 800p resolution, you could run anything with a decent frame rate on at least low settings, and I even managed to get some games running all the way up to 4K on the TV. It's still a bit on the heavy side, but fortunately the Steam Deck is ergonomic enough that the weight is mainly stored in your hands, so it's not that noticeable. The controller layout might look weird at first, but it's effective once you get used to it. All the buttons feel solid, and best of all, they're using full analog sticks instead of the small Joy-Con sticks everyone else seems to be using. Yes, analog sticks suck for many PC games, but fortunately Valve added trackpads that work surprisingly well for shooters, and they even provided a gyroscope if you want more refined aiming. But the best thing about it is the OS. I remember when I first started using Linux nearly 15 years ago, and I remember getting frustrated trying to get anything working on it. Although I got more comfortable with time, it was still hard for me to stick with it in favor of Windows because it was too much of a hassle to get some essential software working on it, particularly games. For the last few years, Valve has been working hard at improving the Linux experience for gamers, creating a new compatibility layer called Proton that would make it possible to run Windows games on Linux. This was much easier compared to praying to any god out there to get Wine to work, and I was able to get nearly all of my most played games working on Linux as well as on the Steam Deck. Valve did an incredible job with their new SteamOS. The user interface is clean and is easily navigable with a controller. Everything is easily accessible with a press of the Steam button, from viewing your library to messing around with the settings. And if you want to go more in depth with the power consumption and performance, you can press the ellipsis button to mess around with the settings as much as your heart desires. However, despite all the effort Valve made into creating a console-like experience for the Steam Deck, it's still a PC at heart, and a Linux PC no less. There are some notable titles that won't work, particularly multiplayer games that require an anti-cheat service to run in the background. I've also faced issues trying to get non-Steam games working on the deck. You can install other programs like Lutris or Heroic that allow you to install other game launchers, but my overall experience has been mixed. I've had no issues with certain games, but others I just couldn't get to work. I tried to get Overwatch 2 working using numerous programs. I was able to install and boot the game just fine, but after a minute of playing, the game would always crash. I tried looking through Google to see if there were any solutions, and although I found a few Reddit posts that claimed to have a solution, none of them worked for me. I've had similar issues getting games from Origin and Epic Games Store working, so if you're looking to play games on other launchers, you might run into some trouble. Even for verified Steam games, you might need to mess around with a desktop and write console commands to get certain games working, which might be too intimidating for those who want a simple console experience. But if you pay attention to Proton DB, you should be able to play most games without issues. You could work around this by installing Windows on the deck, but from what I tested, that's still no guarantee your game will work. You might run into issues installing the drivers needed for the deck to work properly, and you'll require third-party software to use the controller for non-Steam games. Plus, Windows is not an ideal OS to use with a controller, so having a keyboard and mouse on standby is recommended. If you don't want to deal with that, you could always stream your games from your computer, but for whatever reason, the deck won't list the games that are ready for streaming. You'll need to manually find the games you want to stream in your library, and then switch from installing to streaming. These games will show up in your library when playing through the desktop app, so why can't you show them from your library in the OS? Although the Steam Deck did many things right, there are still a lot of things about it that still feel like a prototype. The screen isn't the best quality, with some people having problems with bleed-in. The rumble is perhaps the weakest I've ever felt on any device, and the touchscreen doesn't seem to be calibrated correctly, as it appears to always select lower than when I'm touching, and sometimes my touches don't even recognize until I press the screen hard enough. Also, the OS can feel sluggish at points, particularly when you're switching between the different stages at the library screen, and not being able to download games while in sleep mode is a pain in the ass. Hopefully Valve will be able to fix these issues with future updates, but even with that, the Steam Deck is still an overall great device that I see myself using all the time. Does this mean the Steam Deck is a Switch killer? Well, yes and no. If you're looking for pure performance, the Steam Deck destroys the Switch, but there's a lot of compromises made to get there. It's heavy, the battery life still isn't great, and you can still run into issues if you're looking to play certain games. If you're tech savvy enough to deal with it, then be my guest. But if you're looking for a device that's lighter, has a better battery life, a simpler interface, and has access to Nintendo games that doesn't involve downloading ROMs on the internet, I would say to just stick with the Switch. Yeah, I know the Switch is getting old and some of these ports are really pushing the console to its limits, but there's still a charm in seeing many of the most high-end games of the last decade running on this thing. Until Nintendo announces their new console, we're stuck with mobile hardware from 2015. And you know what? I'm alright with that. The Switch has and continues to provide an incredible selection of games to play, either on the TV or on the go. With the way Nintendo continues to support it, I can see it going for another couple years. I mean, I would love it if they get the next system out soon, but to be honest, I'm not in any rush. The Switch has become one of my favorite systems, with a plethora of great exclusives, indies, and third-party games, and it should keep people happy for many years to come. I'm just happy to see Nintendo back to making great games again, and for the first time in a while, I feel confident in what Nintendo will bring out in the future. Woo! I'm finally done talking about Nintendo consoles. Now I can
Enter the promo code, subscribe to Tominac, and you'll get 10 free ranks in the paid Lambo Legends Battle Pass!
Oh, for fuck's sake!